Practice exercise 5. Adjective clauses using connectors such as that, when, where, who, whom may sometimes define words. Now this kind of goes back to another skill that we talked about, which is using appositives. Now the difference between an appositive and an adjective clause is an appositive is an example. It's an example of a reduced adjective clause. The connector has been omitted and the verb has been omitted. Either case, you're using the grammar to help you understand the meanings of words you're not sure about. So let me say it again. If you have pretty good grammar skills, you can separate the subject from the verb and you have your object coming after that, and you can understand certain words or modifying other words. Yes, this can actually help you improve your guessing of unknown words by focusing on the grammar within the sentence to identify the meaning. So let's take a look at buzzer. Interesting enough, a very common word, but sometimes I've found out from my TOEFL classes some of my students have difficulty with very common words. This morning, for example, I mean, how hard is this? This was in my level 4 TOEFL class. I was asking them the name of the position in baseball, the guy or the girl who actually throws the ball to the batter. What do you call that? And out of 18 students in my high intermediate TOEFL class, nobody knew that the name of this player is a pitcher. So a lot of my students, they have pretty good college vocabulary, but they don't know the common words. So make sure that you learn both. You learn common and also college level vocabulary. Here we go. Soon, just after the pressure of the child's bladder is associated with the buzzer, which awakens the child to use the restroom. Although the full bladder occurs naturally, it is the buzzer that teaches the child to wake up. So a buzzer, it awakens the child, or the buzzer teaches the child to wake up. You notice here it says that teaches, and then it says which awakens. This is an adjective clause which is identifying that. This is an adjective clause, again, identifying this word. So you should be able to understand what buzzer means. A buzzer is something with beep, 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 beep. It wakes you up in the morning. So it says, with which answer is a buzzer most closely associated? You have a small child, wet cloth, money, annoying noise, or double bed. Your best answer here is annoying noise, because it makes a noise. Because how else would somebody wake up when they're sleeping if the buzzer doesn't make any noise? There's no way they would wake up. Okay, let's go to 2. It says, the question here is, what is a canal? These slow-moving rivers feed many canals that irrigate farmlands. If not for these canals, many farmlands would be a desert. Now we know that a canal, that means canals, so canals irrigate farmlands, and we know that canals prevent farmlands from being a desert, and we know the opposite of desert is an area that has water, so canals have to do with water, something to do with water. So you have A, to plant seeds, to transport water, to dam rivers, to carry sand, to feed farmers. Now usually you should be able to eliminate all of these answers except for B and C, to transport water, to dam rivers. Your best answer is to transport water, where it says they feed. They feed many canals that irrigate farmlands. A canal brings water to the farmland, so we say it transports. All right, let's take a look at 3. We're talking about sanctuary. What does sanctuary mean? It says Faulkner's principal residence during the next several months was near Paris, France, just around the corner from the Luxembourg Gardens, where he spent most of his time. His written description of the gardens would later be revised for the closing of Sanctuary, which was published a few years later. Now the question, what does this mean? Now it also says here, which was published. What is published? A book is published. An article is published. A magazine is published. Published typically means something in writing is put into a public format where people can read it, they can maybe purchase it, so on. So the question is, in which location would sanctuary most likely be found? You have library, movie theater, supermarket, automotive store. I think the best location here would be as a library. Would probably be because when a library has books, and sanctuary is something which is published, which is writing, so we would say A. Okay, let's take a look at 4 here. Fire management companies suppress fires and use prescribed burning, which is a controlled fire in a confined area, so that habitats needing fire can still survive while the general public and industry can remain safe. So it says, which of the following is not true about a prescribed burn? So step 1, you identify prescribed burning, and then of course, if you're smart, you identify which is a controlled fire in a confined area. You have to identify this as being important. So once you've identified this adjective clause as modifying that, a prescribed burn is a controlled fire in a confined area, then you have A, it is deliberately set. I think this is true. B, it is used as a tool to fight fire. Again, that's true. Its cause comes from lightning. It is used to protect the general public. I think where it says it is a controlled fire so that habitats needing fire can still survive while the general public can remain safe, which means protected. So what is not true, it doesn't say anything about lightning. Lightning means it's a natural cause. It's caused by nature. But the rest of these things are all things that the reading passage does mention. Number 5. Columns of volcanic ash and dust rose more than 2 miles into the air, at times turning day into night at the town of Pahala, nearly 20 miles downwind. Fortunately, only one person was killed during this eruption, a photographer who ventured too close and was struck by falling rocks and hot mud. The question here is what is true, and you can look at the answer choices: injured, killed, burned, photograph, professional. You're trying to identify, exactly what happened. So I think if you look at the last part of this reading passage, I think this gives you the information that you want to pay attention to. Now, of course, you also need to pay attention to who. What does who mean? Who means photographer. So the photographer, ventured means traveled. The photographer traveled too close and was struck by falling rocks and hot mud. We also know that one person was killed, and it means a photographer. It means who was a photographer. So actually, to understand, I think, the answer to this question, you have to understand that photographer is in a positive, which refers back to the person who was killed, and then who ventured too close means the photographer. So by understanding the appositive and the adjective clause, I think you can understand the meaning of this passage. So what is true? No one was injured. That's false. One person was killed. Many people were burned? No. Only one person was burned and killed. Hardly anyone was killed? You have a photographer was far away from the volcanic eruption. That's actually false. A professional met his fatal demise. So in this one, I kind of tricked you on this. This is a 2 answer. Click on 2 answers. I think hardly anyone was killed is true. Now, be careful though. Hardly anyone doesn't mean that no one was killed. It means almost no one was killed. So because one person was killed, I think answer choice B is a good answer. And then the last answer choice E, a professional met his fatal demise. I think professional is a synonym for the word photographer. And then met his demise, fatal means to die or to be killed, is similar to only one person was killed. So I think here answer choice B and answer choice E are your best answers. Practice exercise 6. Reference. Words that refer back to or forward to other words in the sentence. They may help you to understand the meaning of an unknown word. Now I got to also tell you, I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone here. There's also another type of question on the TOEFL test where it asks you, for example, what does it mean? Or what does that refer to? So it's pretty important to follow the pronouns and understand what they connect to. All right, let's take a look at some examples of this. Our question here is what does the word endogamy mean? Now, if you're like me, you probably have no idea what that means. Let's take a look. Our next discussion today will focus on Turkish marriage patterns. Marriage patterns in rural Turkey are noticeably influenced by endogamous preferences within both villages and kinship groups. Other important marriage rules and customs center on the requirement that prospective husbands pay a substantial bride price to their fathers-in-law. Now I think when it says endogamous preferences, and then you see here it says other important marriage rules, and don't we really have to assume that this idea refers back to the previous sentence, because TOEFL reading passages, they're very cohesively tied together, and cohesively tied together means each sentence is directly connected to the previous sentence and the sentence which comes after it. So we know that endogamy is a type of marriage rule. Because of that word there, we're going to say that's what this is. So I think it's important to pay attention to this word here. Okay, what is endogamy? An expensive loan, citizen of Turkey, a marriage rule, a large family. Of course, your best answer here is a marriage rule. Number 2. In the late 1960s, researchers lacked knowledge of psittacine communication in the wild and assumed that natural behaviors would not differ greatly from what had been observed in captivity. The ability of parrots to reproduce with great accuracy sounds such as those of human speech, but little, if any, ability to use these vocalizations in a meaningful way. Now, the question is, what does vocalizations refer to? I think because of the word these, you see that? These vocalizations, and you notice it says speech, such as those, sounds, reproducing sounds. So these vocalizations have to do with sounds. Am I right? Now another way you can look at this is you've probably heard the word vocal, and you have IZE, you have TION. Vocal has to do with the mouth or the vocal tract. IZE changes it into a verb, and then TION changes it into a noun. So even another strategy, we'll talk about this in another lesson, but actually breaking apart the word into the root and any affixes, prefixes or suffixes, and use that to help you understand the meaning of the word. So let's take a look at our answer choices. What does vocalizations refer to? You have human sounds, natural behaviors, researchers, human speech, or bird sounds. And let's go back, see what it says. And it says the ability to use these vocalizations in a meaningful way. So we're talking about parrots making sounds, so they're definitely not human sounds. They're not natural behaviors, they're not researchers, they're not human speech, because really, if A is wrong, then D is wrong, and your best answer here is going to be bird sounds as your best answer there. Okay, let's go to 3. Let's go down to another page here where we can see this one better. Here it is. The plant gets its green color because chlorophyll is green. You remember what I said about the be verb? So we know chlorophyll has to do with green, and green means color. It says many seaweeds and other plants that do not appear to be green also have chlorophyll and therefore can convert the sun's energy into food. In these plants, the greenness is hidden by other pigments. So I think the main thing here is the greenness, or green colors, hidden by other, and of course here pigments is a type of color, because the word other is giving examples of other types of pigments which are not green. So what is a pigment? Seaweed, color, algae, plant, or conversion. Your best answer here is B, color. Number 4. The raw materials that are needed for photosynthesis are the same raw materials that make up carbohydrates: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The carbon dioxide breathed out by animals is a source of carbon and oxygen. Hydrogen is taken from water, and these raw materials enter the plant through its roots and leaves. So here it says, which of the following is not an example of a raw material? So I think you got to go back to where it says the same raw materials that make up carbohydrates. I think that this is important. Raw materials. Now also, I didn't really mention it, but it's important to pay attention to punctuation, which is an additional tool, because once you use the colon, you see this dot dot here, it means that you're going to introduce typically a series of items which are extremely dependent on the previous idea. So I think it's safe to say that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are examples of some raw materials. So it says here, which of the following is not an example of a raw material? You have carbon, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. These are 3 examples mentioned, and then leaf. Leaf was not mentioned as an example of a raw material. Okay, here's question 5. And over the past 30 years, same-sex couples have sought societal recognition of their families. It began in the early 1970s when lesbian and gay couples applied for marriage licenses, asked courts to allow one partner to adopt the other, and took steps to legally cement their relationship. Most of these efforts failed. This is the key, these. Now, what it says here is they applied for marriage licenses. They asked courts to allow one partner to adopt the other, and they took other steps to legally seal their relationship. So efforts, different things that people do. Let's take a look at your choices here. It says effort is closest in meaning to. You have petition, belief, marriage, law, or license. Kind of tricky stuff, but I think petition is going to be the best answer, because petition is kind of like requests, and it looks like you have the gay couples are applying for marriage licenses. They're asking to get these licenses. They're asking courts, and they're taking other legal steps. They're making requests to give their marriages more legitimacy. So I think request, I think petition, I think efforts are all kind of similar based on the context of that particular reading passage. Practice exercise 7. Sometimes the meaning of a word can be understood because it is in contrast to another word in a sentence. Words like but, despite, however, in contrast, in spite of, instead, or unlike, whereas, might help. Now this is not going to work all the time, but sometimes it might help you understand some things. Okay, let's take a look at number one. Studies show an elevated, and pay attention to the parentheses here. I mentioned in the previous exercise understanding punctuation like colons versus commas, in this case parentheses, but parentheses are good ways of explaining something, giving some information about something which came before it. So elevated, but so far not statistically significant, risk of lymphatic and hematopoietic cancers. Wow, that's a hard word to pronounce, for most firefighters. There is, however, a statistically significant risk for firefighters with more than 30 years of service. So it looks like this reading passage is trying to say that if you've been a firefighter for a short time, you probably don't have a high risk of cancer. But if you have been a firefighter for more than 30 years, you do have a higher risk for cancer. So elevated. What's a synonym for elevated? Significant? No, because right after elevated it says not statistically significant. So if it's not really significant, then maybe it's not serious. Maybe it's not terminal. Terminal means that for sure you're going to die. I don't think elevated means that, and it doesn't mean a high risk, because if it's not statistically significant, then maybe it's not a high risk. But increased. Increased risk means maybe you do have a risk of cancer, but so far it doesn't seem to be scientifically a significant risk. So I'm going to say increased risk is probably better than your four other answer choices there. Let's go to 2. Wolfgang began composing minuets at the age of 5 and symphonies at 9. When he was 6, he and his older sister, Maria Anna, embarked on a series of concert tours to Europe's courts and major cities. Both children played the keyboard, but Wolfgang became a violin virtuoso as well. So the question is, what does virtuoso mean? Now I think virtuoso, obviously, if you're playing in concerts, you have to be pretty good. Now it says both children played the keyboard, but Wolfgang became a violin virtuoso as well. It means that not both children were really good with the piano and the keyboard, but not both of them were good at the violin. In fact, only Wolfgang was really good at the violin. So I think virtuoso has to do with being really good at something. So virtuoso, you have novice, beginner, pianist, sibling, or expert. I think your best answer here is expert, being an expert at doing something. Okay, let's take a look at 3. And the question here is which answer is closest in meaning to all-inclusive? It says, according to Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary, a family is the basic unit in society having as its nucleus 2 or more adults living together and cooperating in the care and rearing of their own or adopted children. Despite this all-inclusive definition, a lesbian or gay couple with or without children is not the image conjured up when most people create a picture of a family. Nevertheless, lesbian and gay couples and their children consider themselves families. Now, you might not even know what this word means, but don't give up. Conjured up when most people create a picture. This is what I'm telling you. And these are reading passages. I need to tell you this. I found these passages out of college textbooks, and it just shows you how the actual reading passage helps you define other words you're not sure. So conjured up actually does mean to create a picture of something. But we're focusing more on all-inclusive. I think If you know the word include, and all include pretty much means everything. So you go back to the definition, the basic unit, having as its nucleus two or more adults living together and cooperating in the care and rearing of their own or adopted children. So all-inclusive means a pretty general definition, but a definition which pretty well fits everybody. So what does it mean? Here's your choices. Divisive. Divisive means doesn't include everybody. Encompassing. Maybe. Exclusionary? No, because if it's not divisive, exclusionary is kind of divisive, and fragmentary is also similar and limited. Your best answer is encompassing. That means relating to everybody. Now, the point here, when you're doing reading on the TOEFL, some of the answers, like answer choice A, answer choice C, D, and actually E, these answers are actually antonyms. They're in some way opposite in meaning to what you read. So that's why it's important when you're studying vocabulary, make sure that you have a good understanding of not only basic vocabulary, but also synonyms and antonyms to those basic vocabulary words. That's how you really begin to improve your vocabulary skills. Right? Number 4. The Indian people of Mexico use the harp in nearly all the music of the day. The region of Veracruz and Jalisco, however, stood above all other areas. By the 1800s, the Jericho Ensemble of Veracruz and the Cuarteto Mariachi of Teclan had developed as standard musical groups, but the size and awkwardness of the harp contributed to its gradual decline in use. So I think the word but's important because it's trying to explain why the harp did not become as popular in other areas as it was in the region of Veracruz and Jalisco. So it says the size and awkwardness. Now because of the word and, you can infer here that awkwardness and size are similar. Now you can probably guess that the size of it means it was fairly large. It was a large instrument, and because it was so big, a lot of people did not want to use it. Which brings us to the question, which phrase is closest in meaning to awkwardness? Small in stature, having a sharp melody, having extreme popularity, difficult to handle, measuring close to standard. Your best answer here is actually difficult to handle. Because it is so large, it is difficult to handle. Therefore, the harp did not become as popular as other instruments in Mexico. Number 5. Let's go down to the next page here, it'll be better. As the wind blows, their elegant fronds dance with the flow of the breeze. Coconut trees possess the mystical ability to conjure up a tropical paradise atmosphere wherever they may be found. However, like all other kinds of vegetation, coconut trees are susceptible to insect attacks. So the word however is kind of an opposite kind of meaning here, and they're basically saying that these trees are very pretty and people like to look at them, but like other types of vegetation, insects will also try to attack them. So susceptible, what does it mean? Exempt, vulnerable, partial, penetrated, or smothered. I think susceptible and vulnerable are actually similar. So susceptible or vulnerable means that these types of trees are likely to be attacked, or very likely to be attacked, just like other types of vegetation. And the last vocabulary strategy I want to mention with you in this video is practice exercise 8. It says, though they may not give a specific definition Other words in a sentence may give a general meaning of the word. So again, it just solidifies the point I've been making all along in this video, is pay attention not only to the word, but to other parts of the sentence or the paragraph, which may give you clues as to what that word means. Now, I need to also tell you, the faster that you can read, the better you can make these kinds of connections. So I encourage you to increase your reading speed with the goal of reading approximately 300 words a minute with 60% comprehension, and I think probably you can make these kinds of connections fairly quickly. Paragraph 1. Babbling begins at approximately the 6th month of age with a large range of sounds. The parent or adult typically responds through attending behavior and imitation of the child's sounds, modifying these in accordance with the phonological rules of the adult language. So the question is, what does babbling mean? You know that babbling begins with, it says, a large range of sounds. And it goes on, the parent responds, modifying these according to the child's sounds, but we know babbling has to do with sounds. So then the question is, what does babbling mean? Does it mean human speech? You go, wait a minute. We're talking about the 6th month of age. You know, babies, when they're 6 months old, are they saying, hi, how are you? What's going on? No, I don't think so. So I don't think it's human speech. Making sounds, yes. Crying, sleeping, whistling. Your best answer here is answer choice B, making sounds, because of the second line after the word babbling. You see a large range of sounds. So other words in the actual sentence or paragraph may help you to understand the meaning of the word you might not be sure about. Number 2, Anchorage, about 120 kilometers northwest of the epicenter, sustained the most severe damage to property. About 30 blocks of dwellings and commercial buildings were damaged or destroyed in the downtown area. The J.C. Penney Company building was damaged beyond repair. The Four Seasons apartment building, a new 6-story structure, collapsed, and many other multi-story buildings were damaged heavily. The question is, what does the word structure mean? So you're kind of using several different strategies here at the same time. Obviously, it says the Four Seasons apartment building, right? So you keep track of that, but then you see the positive says a new 6-story structure collapsed. So structure is a type of building. Because we know that a new 6-story building, this isn't a positive, and it modifies buildings, so then we have to assume that structure and building are similar. So which answer is closest in meaning to structure? Epicenter, earthquake, word order, building, or airflow? Your best answer here is building. Chet's piano player, Dick Twardzik, 24, died in a Paris hotel of an overdose. The narcotics problem was rearing its ugly head, and Baker himself soon became hopelessly strung out. He was arrested in April 1959 for having heroin in his possession. So this is the thing. You notice that you have overdose, you have narcotics, which means drugs, you have the word strung out, then you have, of course, being arrested for having heroin in his possession, and heroin is a type of drug. So a lot of this, it looks like it's talking about drugs, right? So to be strung out, what does that mean? To play a piano, to drink heavily, to be high on drugs, to drive a long distance, to serve time in prison. To be strung out is to be high on drugs, because they're talking about narcotics and having heroin, and we're not talking about drinking alcohol, at least in this particular reading passage. So your best answer here is answer choice C. 4. The platypus has a thick covering of waterproof hair all over its body except for the feet and bill. The outer hair is a dark brown with yellowish hair on its underside. There are about 800 hairs per square millimeter. This is denser than the fur of the river otter or polar bear. The platypus has 2 layers of hair. The top or longer layer is a shiny guard fur with woolly, short fur undercoat. The thermal qualities of the fur allow the platypus to withstand cold temperatures. So it looks like they're talking about this platypus as having extremely thick hair. It's waterproof hair. It talks about how it's denser than the river otter or the polar bear. They're talking about how it can withstand very cold temperatures. So definitely it likes the water and it likes the cold based on this paragraph and using a lot of the words in the paragraph to understand the platypus and the environment for the platypus. So what would be least suitable? River, lake, pond, snow, or desert. I think desert would be the least suitable because deserts don't have a lot of water, and it's talking about water, water, and more water in this particular one. Okay, 5. Let's go down to the next page. It says, picture the most violent of all tornadoes. A violent whirling column of air with speeds of 100 to 300 miles per hour, a funnel which extends downward from a cumulonimbus cloud, almost always seen as rapidly rotating, a slender, a funnel-shaped cloud which usually destroys everything in its path. So you see the word, the most violent of all tornadoes, a violent whirling column of air. You also see the word rapidly rotating. You also see the word a slender funnel shaped cloud. So whirling has to do with rotating based on what we're reading, right? So whirling means horizontal. Horizontal means going across. Vertical means going up. Circular means going in a circular, kind of a circle direction. Flatten means flat, unmoving, not doing anything. Did you get C? This is your best answer, is circular. Moving in a rotating or circular direction is your best answer. With vocabulary study, there is one more strategy that I think can be very useful, and like other vocabulary strategies, it may not work all the time, but the question I get a lot is, how to identify the meaning of a word from its parts? Let's take a look at this question. Now, what you have to do is what's called chunking. Chunking would be you take a word, you break it into meaningful parts, and you can break it into the base word. And the base word basically means it's a word to which the prefixes or suffixes are added to create a related word or to somehow change the meaning of the word. An affix refers to one or more sound or letters which are attached to the beginning or might be attached to the end of the word. And 2 kinds of affixes in English are prefixes and suffixes. Put another way, it's important to understand how words are made up. They're made up of the root, as I just said, and a prefix. Some words also have a suffix. For example, let's take a look at the root word port. Port means to carry or to bear. Now, if you take a prefix, for example, X, which means out or out of, and you attach it to the word port, you actually have the word export. Now, export means to carry out. Now let's say you go back to the base word port and then you attach M to it. Now you have M, which means enter into, and you actually have the word import, which means to carry in. So export means to carry out and import means to carry in. Now let's go back to the word port. Let's take the prefix trans. Have you ever heard the word transport? Well, transport means across, and you have the word port, which means to carry, so now you have the meaning of to carry across. Now let's say you actually take the word transport and you attach the suffix able to it. And able, of course, means able to be, Now you actually have the word. It's called either transportable. If you take export and put able on it, you have exportable. And if you take import and put able at the end of it, you have importable. I mean, even think about this. The very words, even prefix and suffix, are examples of words that you can understand by looking at the base. Pre, which is the prefix, means before. Fix means to fashion or attach. So its prefix literally is something which attaches to something else. How about the word suff, S-U-F? Suff is actually a variant of sub, and you know that sub kind of means below or under. So a suffix is something that's fastened underneath something else. Of course, in this case, the suffix is it's a group of letters which attaches to the end of something. Now you may be asking yourself, well, what is the value of this specifically in terms of TOEFL IBT vocabulary? It's an additional tool to help you understand the meanings of new words. So if you learn common roots and prefixes and you learn a few suffixes, it actually helps you predict the meaning of many new words almost immediately. In the next part of this video, I'm going to give you some examples of general roots and prefixes in terms of the root, the meaning, and some example words. You will also see some examples of number prefixes to also help build your vocabulary. And finally, you'll see some additional suffixes to give you some additional vocabulary base. Now, I recommend, as you see the example words, you can kind of guess what they mean, but it's probably a good idea to look up these words in the dictionary if you're not exactly sure what they mean, to make sure that they mean what you think they mean. And hopefully, as you learn these prefixes, suffixes, and roots, it will help you expand your vocabulary knowledge more than it is right now.